The morning after we buried my father, my brother Marcus changed the locks on the building that my hands helped build.
He didn't call me. He didn't text me.
I found out when I drove to the office at 7 in the morning, coffee in one hand, a folder of contracts in the other, and my key wouldn't turn. I stood there in the parking lot of Hargrove Industrial Supply for 3 full minutes trying the key again and again, like maybe the lock was just stiff. It wasn't stiff. It was new. I could see the shine on the brass from where I was standing. Marcus had gone to a hardware store, picked out a new lock set, and installed it the same night we put our father in the ground. That told me everything I needed to know about how long he had been planning this. My name is Nadia Hargrove. I am 34 years old. I had worked inside that building since I was 19 years old, filing invoices after school, learning the supply chain, memorizing vendor contracts, covering shifts when staff called out sick. And on that cold Tuesday morning in March, I was standing outside it like a stranger. My father's name was Earl Hargrove. He started Hargrove Industrial Supply out of a rented garage in Columbus, Ohio, when I was 4 years old and Marcus was 7. He sold bolts, pipes, safety gear, and electrical components to construction companies, small factories, and local contractors. It was not a glamorous business. It smelled like machine oil and cardboard most days. But it was ours, and my father was proud of every square foot of it. By the time I turned 25, the company had grown to 11 employees, 2 delivery trucks, and annual revenue sitting just above $2 million. My father used to say the business was like a garden. It needed daily attention, or it would die. I believed him. I watered that garden every single day. I handled accounts receivable, managed vendor relationships, processed purchase orders, and kept the warehouse organized when our stock manager went on paternity leave for 6 weeks. Marcus, on the other hand, had a different relationship with the business. He showed up when it was convenient. He took long lunches with clients that turned into full afternoons away from the office. He liked making the sales calls because those came with restaurant tabs and the feeling of being the man in charge. The behind-the-scenes work, the part that kept everything from falling apart, that was always mine. I want to be fair here because fairness matters to me even when nobody is being fair to me. Marcus was not useless. He was a good salesman when he tried. He had the kind of easy confidence that made clients like him quickly. He could walk into a room full of contractors and walk out with a signed deal before they had finished their coffee. That was real. I never denied it. But sales without operations is just a promise you cannot keep. And I was the one keeping the promises. When Marcus landed a big contract with a regional construction firm in 2019, he came back to the office grinning like he had saved the company. What he had actually done was commit us to a delivery schedule we were not ready for. I spent 3 weeks reworking our inventory system, calling backup suppliers, and negotiating with a client's project manager to adjust timelines without losing the deal. Marcus got the credit at dinner that night. My father raised his glass and said, "That's my boy." I smiled from across the table and passed the bread basket. I had learned a long time ago that being the reliable one meant being the invisible one. My father loved me. I know he did. But love and recognition are 2 different things. The favoritism started early. I remember being 12 years old and entering a school science fair. I spent 3 weeks building a working water filtration model using materials my father helped me gather from the garage. I came in second place. My father told me second place was a good effort. 2 months later, Marcus won a junior soccer tournament. My father rented out a back room at a local restaurant and invited 20 people to celebrate. I sat at the far end of the table eating chicken wings and telling myself it didn't mean anything.
But it meant something.
It always means something when a child is taught that their best effort is worth a pat on the back while their sibling's achievement is worth a party. I don't say this to make my father a villain. He wasn't. He was a man with a blind spot, and that blind spot had Marcus's name on it. As we got older, the pattern never changed. Marcus got the bigger bedroom when we moved houses. Marcus got the newer car when our father decided to upgrade. Marcus got introduced first at business meetings, even when I had prepared the materials being discussed. Your brother just needs more time to find his footing. My father once told me when I mentioned that I was doing more work than Marcus for the same pay. I nodded. I always nodded. When I was 26, I asked my father to make me operations manager. It was not a bold request. I was already doing the job. I just wanted the title and the salary that matched the responsibility.
My father said he would think about it.
Marcus overheard the conversation and pulled my father aside. I could not hear what they said, but 2 days later my father came to my desk and told me he was creating a co-director structure where Marcus and I would share leadership equally. I typed purchase orders until 9 at night while Marcus left at 4 to coach his son's Little League team.
Equally.
I handled a workers' compensation claim that nearly cost us our insurance policy while Marcus was in Florida for a long weekend with his wife.
Equally.
I never brought it up again because I understood by then that the word had a different meaning in our family. It meant that Marcus would receive equal credit without equal effort. It meant that I was the spine of the operation and Marcus was the face, and our father had decided that the face was worth more. I accepted it because I loved my father. I accepted it because the business was growing, and I was proud of that growth. And I accepted it, if I am honest, because I did not yet know what I was truly worth. My father's health started declining in the fall of last year. It began with fatigue that he blamed on a long summer. Then it was a cough that wouldn't leave. By November, the doctors found fluid around his lungs, and by January, we had a diagnosis that none of us were ready to hear. He passed on February 28th, quietly, in the hospital room with Marcus and me on either side of him. I held his left hand. Marcus held his right. My father looked at me near the end and said, "You kept it running, Nadia. Don't let it stop." I told him I wouldn't. I meant it with everything I had. Marcus said nothing during that moment. He was staring at the window. 3 days later, my key did not work. I have thought about my father's last words to me many times since then.
I have thought about the timing of them.
Whether he knew something I didn't. Whether those words were a comfort or a warning. Both, I think. He knew Marcus. He knew what Marcus was capable of when he felt cornered by grief or threatened by change. My father had tried to hold everything in balance his whole life. But balance only works when everyone agrees to hold their side. Marcus had already let go before the funeral was over. After my key failed, I called Marcus immediately. My hands were steady. My voice was steady. I had not cried yet that morning. I was still in work mode, the same mode that had carried me through vendor emergencies and payroll crises and flu season with a skeleton staff. The phone rang 4 times. He picked up on the 5th. I told him my key wasn't working and asked if there was a maintenance issue with the lock. There was a pause. Not a confused pause. A prepared one. Then he said, "I had the locks changed last night, Nadia." I asked him why. He said, "I think it's better if we keep things simple for now. I'm going to be running things going forward. It's cleaner this way."
Cleaner.
Like, I was a mess to be sorted out. Like 15 years of work could be swept aside with a word like cleaner. I asked him what that meant exactly. He said Dad had always seen him as the leader of the business, and now that Dad was gone, he was just making it official. He said it like it was already settled. Like a decision had been made in a room I had never been allowed into. I told him we needed to talk in person. He said he'd have his assistant reach out to schedule something. His assistant. He was already speaking to me like I was a vendor he was trying to delay. I sat in my car in that parking lot for 22 minutes after I hung up. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I just sat there and let the feeling settle into something I could use. Here is what people do not understand about being the reliable one in a family. Everyone assumes reliability means you will absorb whatever is thrown at you and keep going. And for a long time, that is exactly what I did. I absorbed and kept going. But reliability is not the same as having no limit. The people who depend on you just never bother to find out where the limit is. Marcus had just found mine. After 22 minutes, I did one thing. I called a woman named Patricia Cole. Patricia had been our family's attorney for 11 years. She had helped my father set up the original business structure, file the LLC paperwork, and update the operating agreement twice over the years. She had attended my father's retirement planning meetings. She knew the business documents better than anyone outside the family. Her phone rang twice before she picked up. I said, "Patricia, it's Nadia Hargrove. I need to see you today. It's urgent." She said, I was actually going to call you this week. Her tone told me she already knew something. Something that Marcus clearly did not. Patricia's office was on the fourth floor of a building downtown with tall windows and the kind of quiet that made you feel like important things happen there. I had been there a few times with my father over the years. Once to sign documents when the business expanded to a second warehouse. Once when my father updated his personal will. I had never gone alone. I sat across from her desk at 11 that morning still wearing my coat because I had not thought to take it off. Patricia was in her 60s, sharp-eyed, and she had a way of presenting difficult information that was clear without being cruel. She opened a file folder on her desk and placed it between us. She told me that 6 months ago, my father had come to see her privately. He had not told Marcus. He had not told me. He had come alone on a Thursday afternoon in September, and he had asked Patricia to make changes to the business ownership structure. She said he had been thinking about it for a long time. He told her he had watched both of us for years. He said he knew Marcus was the talker and I was the builder. And he said that a business, without its builder, does not survive. Patricia slid a document across the desk toward me. It was a revised operating agreement signed by my father on September 19th. I picked it up and read the first line twice. The document said that Nadia Hargrove held 60% ownership of Hargrove Industrial Supply, LLC. Marcus Hargrove held 35%. The remaining 5% had been assigned to a business continuity reserve managed by Patricia as trustee. My father's signature was at the bottom of every page. I stared at the numbers for a long moment. 60%. Majority ownership. I had not known. I had not been told. My father had done this quietly 6 months before he died, without discussion, without announcement, and without telling his favored son. I looked up at Patricia. She said, "He told me he didn't want to tell you while he was still alive because he was afraid it would change how you worked. He said you worked best when you weren't thinking about ownership. You worked best when you were just taking care of things." I let that sit for a moment. There was something painful in it, and something that felt like the deepest form of love my father knew how to offer. He had seen me. He had always seen me. He had just chosen to protect the business by protecting the truth until the right moment. Patricia then said the 6 words that reset everything. She said, "Marcus made a serious legal mistake." Patricia explained it clearly and without rush. As majority shareholder, I had rights that Marcus had violated the moment he changed those locks. I had the right to access the business premises. I had the right to be informed of major operational decisions. I had the right to call a shareholder meeting. And because the operating agreement gave the majority owner final authority over management decisions, Marcus did not have the legal standing to appoint himself as sole operator without my agreement. He had not just overstepped. He had exposed himself to a formal removal process that was built right into the documents he had never bothered to read. Patricia told me she had tried to reach Marcus the week after my father passed to schedule a reading of the business documents. He had told her assistant he would handle it on his own timeline. He had assumed that as the eldest son, as the one my father had always praised in public, the business was simply his to take. He had not asked to see the operating agreement. He had not consulted a lawyer. He had bought a new lock set and assumed that would be enough. I folded my hands on my knees and asked Patricia what my options were. She said, "Every option available to a majority owner. Where would you like to start?" I told her to start at the beginning. I did not call Marcus that afternoon. I know that might seem strange given what I had just learned, but calling him felt like the wrong move. When you have the stronger hand, you do not show your cards in a hallway. You choose the table. You choose the timing. And you make sure when you sit down that the other person understands what kind of game is actually being played. Instead, I spent the rest of that day with Patricia, going through the documents carefully. She walked me through the operating agreement section by section. She explained my authority over major financial decisions, staffing changes, and business contracts. She explained what a formal shareholder notice looked like and how much time the other party had to respond before decisions could be made unilaterally by the majority owner. She also told me something that made me pause. Marcus had already spoken to 2 of our major vendors that week. He had introduced himself as the new owner and had asked them to update their contact information and billing addresses. He had not mentioned me. He had not mentioned the operating agreement. He had simply planted a new version of reality before I had a chance to tell the truth. That was Marcus, always arriving first to the conversation so he could shape it before anyone else got there. This time I was going to arrive first. That evening, I drove to the home of a man named Walter Briggs. Walter had been our warehouse manager for 9 years. He was 61 years old, steady and loyal, and he had worked for my father long enough to remember when the business ran out of a garage. He was also the person who had texted me that morning, 11 minutes after I had left the parking lot, with a message that said, "Nadia, I'm sorry. I didn't know about the locks until this morning. I want you to know most of us don't agree with this." Most of us. That meant the staff had already been told something. Marcus had moved fast. Walter opened his door before I could knock twice, which meant he had been watching for my car. We sat at his kitchen table, and he told me what had happened. Marcus had called a staff meeting that morning at 8 o'clock, an hour after I had left the parking lot. He had told the 11 employees that he was taking over leadership of the business effective immediately. He told them my role had been administrative and that he would be restructuring responsibilities going forward. He told them the transition would be smooth if everyone cooperated. 2 employees had asked about me by name. Marcus had said I was taking time off to grieve and that I had agreed to step back. That last part was a lie dressed in my name. Walter told me that 3 of the 11 employees had privately expressed concern to him after the meeting. The other 8 had said nothing, which was not necessarily agreement. It was survival. People who depend on a paycheck are careful about which side they show publicly. I did not blame them. I had been doing the same thing for years inside my own family. Walter asked me what I was planning to do. I told him I was not planning to do anything rash or loud. I told him I had spoken to our attorney and that the situation had legal dimensions Marcus was not aware of. Walter nodded slowly. Then he said something that has stayed with me. He said, "Nadia, your father used to tell me that the quiet ones are the ones who built things, and the loud ones are the ones who take credit." He said it like a complaint. But the way he looked when he said it, I always thought he meant it like a compliment. I thanked Walter and asked him for one thing. I asked him not to tell Marcus I had come by. Walter looked at me steadily and said, "I work for the business, not for Marcus. And from what you're telling me, you are the business." I drove home and made a list of every step I needed to take and in what order. Emotion was done. Strategy had started. On Thursday morning, 2 days after I had stood outside that locked building, Patricia sent a formal legal notice to Marcus by certified mail and by email. The notice informed him that as majority shareholder of Hargrove Industrial Supply LLC, I was calling a shareholder meeting for the following Monday at 10 in the morning. The meeting would take place at Patricia's office. Attendance was required under the terms of the operating agreement. The notice also informed him that as of the date of sending, any operational or financial decisions made without majority shareholder approval were subject to review and potential reversal. Patricia also sent a separate letter to the 2 vendors Marcus had contacted. The letter stated that the authorized business representative for all vendor communications was Nadia Hargrove, and that any agreement reached without her written approval was not binding on the company. She copied me on everything. I read each letter twice. They were careful, professional, and absolutely clear. I did not feel triumphant reading them. I felt something more like precision, like a machine that had finally been set to the right calibration. Marcus called me 40 minutes after the email was sent. I let it ring. He called again. I let it ring again. Then he texted, "What is this? Call me now." I put my phone face down on the kitchen table and finished my breakfast. He showed up at my apartment that evening without calling first. I heard the knock and knew before I opened the door. Marcus was wearing a jacket and tie, which meant he had come from the office or wanted to look like he had authority. His face was tight. He was holding his phone like he might use it as evidence. I opened the door and stepped back to let him in without saying anything. He walked into my living room and turned around. He said, "You went to Patricia behind my back." I said Patricia was the family's attorney and I had every right to speak with her. He said, "You had no right to send that notice to the vendors. Do you know how that made me look?" I said, "I sent an accurate notice. How it made you look is a reflection of what you did, not what I said." He stared at me. Then he said, "Dad wanted me to run things. You know that." I asked him if he had read the operating agreement. He said he didn't need to read a document to know what his father wanted. I said, "Then I'll read it to you." I picked up the copy Patricia had given me, which was sitting on my coffee table, and I read the ownership percentages out loud. 60, 35. His face went through 3 expressions in 4 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, then something that looked almost like fear. Marcus sat down on my couch without being invited to. He stared at the floor for a moment. Then he looked up and said, "Dad wouldn't have done that without telling me." I said, "He did." Marcus shook his head. That document could be wrong. It could be outdated. I told him Patricia had confirmed the date of signing, the notarization, and the filing. It was current, legal, and binding. He was quiet for a long moment. I watched him recalculate. I had seen him do this in business meetings when a deal shifted in a direction he hadn't expected. He would go quiet, then come back with a softer angle. He said, "Nadia, we're family. We don't need lawyers and meetings. We can figure this out between us." I said, "You changed the locks the night of Dad's funeral. That was the moment you decided we needed lawyers and meetings, Marcus." I'm just the one who showed up to them. He flinched. Not a big flinch. Just the small kind that shows a sentence has landed. He tried once more. He said, "I was trying to protect the business. You were grieving. I was just stepping up." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "You stepped up into a seat that was never yours. Monday morning, we're going to sort out where everyone actually sits." Saturday and Sunday were quiet. Marcus did not call again after he left my apartment. I used those 2 days carefully. I spoke to Patricia twice to confirm the meeting agenda. I reviewed the operating agreement again and marked the sections that outline the majority owner's rights in cases of unauthorized management decisions. I also made a list of the vendor contracts that would need to be reconfirmed under my authorization. There were 7 active contracts. Marcus had already contacted 2 of them. I called the remaining 5 myself on Saturday morning and introduced myself as the majority owner of Hargrove Industrial Supply. I kept each call short and professional. I explained that any communications they had received recently from other parties should be considered informal until confirmed in writing by me. Each vendor was polite. 3 of them mentioned they had wondered who to contact after my father passed. They were relieved to have a clear answer. I also called Walter Briggs on Sunday evening and told him that starting Monday, I would be returning to the building. I told him I would appreciate it if he could make sure operations ran normally that morning and that staff knew I would be addressing everyone together after the shareholder meeting. Walter said, "I'll make sure the coffee is ready."
It was a small thing.
But it reminded me that while Marcus had moved fast, loyalty ran deeper than locks. Monday arrived gray and cold. I dressed carefully. Dark slacks, a navy blazer, the kind of outfit my father used to call business serious. I arrived at Patricia's office at 9:40. Patricia was already there with 2 copies of the operating agreement on the conference table, a notepad, and the kind of stillness that good attorneys carry into difficult rooms. Marcus arrived at 10:03. He had brought a man with him, a person I didn't recognize, who turned out to be a lawyer Marcus had hired over the weekend. That told me everything about where Marcus's head had been over the past 2 days. He had not been grieving. He had been building a defense. Patricia acknowledged both of them calmly and directed everyone to sit. Marcus took the chair across from me and placed his phone on the table face up, which was a habit of his. He always wanted to look like he was about to receive an important call. His lawyer opened a notepad. Patricia opened the meeting by presenting the operating agreement and confirming its authenticity and legal standing. Marcus's lawyer asked several technical questions. Patricia answered each one without irritation. Then Marcus's lawyer said that his client believed the document had been created under undue emotional influence in the final months of my father's declining health. Patricia said the document had been signed in September, for months before my father's diagnosis was confirmed, and that she had personally witnessed the signing and confirmed his full mental clarity at the time. Marcus's lawyer wrote something down. Marcus stared at the table. After 40 minutes of questions that went nowhere for Marcus's side, Patricia turned to the core matter. She stated that as majority owner, I was exercising my right under Section 7 of the operating agreement to formally resume operational authority over Hargrove Industrial Supply. She stated that decisions made in the preceding week without majority shareholder approval, including the change of locks, the staff announcement, and the vendor outreach, were unauthorized and would be reversed. She handed a document to Marcus's lawyer. It was a notice of management transition, signed by me, outlining what would happen effective that day. Marcus looked at the document for a long time without speaking. His lawyer leaned over and said something quietly in his ear. Marcus looked up at me and said, "You're really doing this?" I said, "I'm correcting what you did. That's different." He said, "This is going to destroy our relationship." I said, "You changed the locks the night of Dad's funeral, Marcus. You destroyed the easy version of this. I'm just building something that actually works." His lawyer tried to negotiate. He suggested a co-management arrangement.
Patricia looked at me.
I said no. I was willing to discuss Marcus's continued role as a minority shareholder with defined responsibilities. But unilateral management authority was no longer something he had the standing to claim. Marcus's lawyer asked for a recess. Patricia said he could have 10 minutes. During the recess, I stood at the window of the conference room and looked at the street below. People were walking with their heads down against the wind. A delivery truck was double-parked outside a pharmacy. Ordinary Tuesday morning things happening in a world that did not know or care about the Hargrove family business. I thought about my father. I thought about the September afternoon he had walked into this same building and asked Patricia to change the documents without telling either of us. I wondered what he had felt driving home that day. Relief, maybe. Or the quiet sadness of a man who knew his sons differently than they knew themselves and had decided to act on that knowledge while he still could. I was not angry with him anymore for keeping it from me. I understood it. He had known that if I found out I was majority owner while he was alive, I would have spent every day after that trying to manage Marcus's reaction instead of managing the business. He had protected the business by protecting me from the knowledge of what I owned. It was not a perfect decision, but it was a loving one. When Marcus and his lawyer came back into the room, Marcus's face had changed. The fight had not left it entirely, but something underneath the fight had shifted. He sat down and said, "What does his role look like if he stays?" We spent another hour working through the structure. Patricia drafted terms while we talked. Marcus's role would be sales director, a title that matched the work he was actually good at. He would receive his compensation as a minority shareholder plus a salary tied to sales performance. He would have no unilateral authority over operations, staffing, vendor contracts, or financial decisions above a threshold of $5,000. Every major decision would require my sign-off as majority owner. His lawyer pushed back on a few points. We adjusted 2 of them. On the third, I held firm. Marcus wanted a clause that would allow him to call a shareholder vote to override my authority if he believed I was acting against the business's interests. I told him no. Patricia explained why the operating agreement did not support that request. Marcus's lawyer looked at his notepad. Eventually, Marcus nodded once and said, "Fine." It was not a gracious yes. It was a tired one, but it was enough. Patricia said she would have the updated agreement drafted within 48 hours for both parties to sign. Marcus stood up first. He looked at me across the table, and for a second I thought he might say something that mattered. Something that acknowledged the weak. Something that sounded like a brother. Instead, he said, "Dad always said you were the reliable one." He walked out. His lawyer followed. Patricia looked at me and said quietly, "He thought that was an insult." I don't think he realized it was the whole story. I drove to the building at noon. Walter Briggs was standing outside the front entrance when I pulled into the parking lot, which I understood immediately was not a coincidence. He had a new key in his hand. Patricia had arranged for the locksmith that morning. Walter held the door open for me and said nothing, which was exactly right. I walked into the building I had worked in for 15 years and took a slow breath. The smell was the same. Machine oil and cardboard, and the faint metallic edge of the warehouse air drifting through the back. My father's office was to the left. The door was closed. I would go in there later. Not yet. I walked to the center of the floor where the staff were working or pretending to. 11 people stopped what they were doing, or at least looked up from it. I recognized every face. I had interviewed 4 of them. I had trained 2. I had written a reference letter for one when he had applied for a bank loan. I stood in the middle of the room and spoke clearly. I told them I was the majority owner of Hargrove Industrial Supply and that I was resuming operational leadership effective today. I told them Marcus would continue with the company in a sales capacity. I told them nothing would change about their roles, their pay, or their schedules. I told them I was glad to be back. One woman started clapping. Then 3 others joined. It was not a dramatic scene. It was just honest. The rest of that week was full of the kind of work I knew how to do. I called every vendor. I reviewed every invoice from the previous week. I found that Marcus had approved a discretionary purchase of $12,000 in office furniture without consulting anyone. I reversed it. The vendor was professional about it. I held a proper operations meeting on Wednesday with a full staff. I listened more than I talked, which is how I always ran meetings. By Friday, the building felt like itself again. Not perfectly healed. Not without tension. Marcus came in on Thursday for a client call, and we passed each other in the hallway. He said good morning. I said good morning. There was distance between us that had not existed before, and I did not try to close it because the distance was honest. Some gaps in a family are created by betrayal and cannot be filled with politeness. They have to be rebuilt with time and different behavior, and that is a longer process than 1 week allows. What I did feel by Friday was something I had not expected. Not triumph. Something quieter. I felt like the building knew I was supposed to be there. The orders came in, and I processed them. The trucks went out on time. The staff worked steadily. The business ran. That was what my father had asked me not to let stop. And I had not let it stop. 6 months later, Hargrove Industrial Supply closed a contract with a mid-sized manufacturing firm that tripled our largest previous deal. I negotiated it myself over 4 weeks, the way my father had taught me, slow and careful and honest about what we could deliver. When the signed contract came through on a Wednesday afternoon, I printed it and put it in a folder and set it on my father's desk, which was now my desk. I sat in his chair for a moment and looked at the framed photo he had kept on the corner of the desk. It was a picture from a company picnic 8 years ago. Marcus was in it.
So was I.
So were 6 of our employees. My father was standing in the back with his hand on my shoulder and his eyes looking directly at the camera. He looked like a man who knew exactly what he had built and who he had built it with. Marcus and I had signed the revised operating agreement 2 weeks after the shareholder meeting. We did not hug. We did not have a long conversation about the past. We signed the papers and I shook his hand, and he went back to his side of the building. He was a better salesman than he had ever been in the old structure because now the rules were clear and the expectations were honest. I stopped confusing loyalty with silence the day I called Patricia. I stopped waiting for credit the day I read that document. Marcus thought I was the backup plan. I was the owner. My father knew that before either of us did. And in the end, the quiet daughter who kept everything running was the one who decided how the story finished.